Well, good afternoon, College of Eastern Idaho. It is April 16th, and it turns out that I'm in Boise today, but our guest, Roger Plothow, is with you in Idaho Falls. And it's a beautiful day here. I think it's moderately beautiful in Idaho Falls. We'll get the official weather report here in a couple of minutes from Roger. But I've been looking forward to this. Roger and I have known each other for a number of years. He has a really fascinating background. And as you probably had seen in the notes that I had sent out, he currently is an instructor with us in communications and is doing some online classes. But he additionally, right now, is employed with Idaho Business for Education and is in youth apprenticeship. So there is a multitude of things that we're going to be able to talk about today. So, Roger, welcome. What a pleasure to have you.
Rick, it's always a pleasure and a learning experience to have a chat with you. I do miss our lunches that we used to have, and we'll need to get back to those. As far as the weather goes today, for this time of the year in Idaho Falls, it's a spectacular day.
I always
Charlie
take
out for a
that
walk.
grain of salt, by the way. But anyway,
It's not bad.
Not bad. Okay. Well, let's do this, Roger, because again, you have multiple. You've done multiple things, and in some respects, are not even particularly connected. So let's spend a few minutes and catch our viewers up with kind of your background. It's always a good way to start.
Some people would say that I can't hold a job, and that there's some truth to that. I spent 37 years as a journalist, starting in 1983 as a reporter in Provo, Utah, and worked my way through. One day, I was pulling out of the parking lot at the Daily Herald there, and I was driving my beat-up little car, and the publisher pulled in with a Cadillac, and I said, and so I began my working my way into management, and I became publisher of a newspaper in St. George, Utah by the time I was 34. And so I really did kind of everything in the newsroom, and then was a publisher for the better part of 20 years. And then the business is going through a transition that really began in the early 2000s. And I really thought that we were approaching a time, my wife and I, for us to look at a change. I went back to school, went to Gonzaga, go Zags. We're still trying to figure out what happened on that last game, but got my master's degree in communication and leadership. I love Gonzaga. I really thoroughly enjoyed the school. I spent some time there on campus, but most of that time was spent learning online. And I wrote my master's degree thesis on online methodologies, and so it's a certain passion of mine that we can talk about later. So, and immediately thereafter, I was brought in as an adjunct faculty at CEI, and I was also hired shortly thereafter at Gonzaga in their graduate program to teach media literacy. And then, as I was sort of considering, do I want to be a teacher full time, or what else do I want to do? This position with Idaho Business for Education really came at me. It's a position funded fully by the U.S. Department of Labor, and it is there to create and sustain youth apprenticeship in the state of Idaho. I'm one of 3 regional business development program managers in the program. So, and I've been doing that for now 6.5 months, and it really just fits with where I want to be and what I believe in and what I want to do. And I'd be happy to talk in more detail about it. But just to sort of provide a little bit of background, and I know, Rick, you're worried that whether I'm going to be able to use up all the time that we have available. So I'll try to rush my way through this. But my father had his EDD, and his focus was continuing education. My mother ran a program that used to be called Elder Hostel. And so continuing education and that kind of thing, and alternatives to traditional education is what I grew up with, and it's sort of in my DNA. So my dad passed before I got this position, but he would be he would see it as sort of an appropriate place for me at this point in my career.
The wonderful thing, it sounds like this is in your DNA, and I didn't realize that. So there's some wonderful synergies that we have with you. I mean, not only that you're teaching for us, but apprenticeship is a big deal, and a lot of, as you know, being involved with the college, a lot of what we talk about is skills. Let's begin for our viewers with Idaho Business for Education. The name makes sense at a level, but why don't you describe who it is, what they do, and who's a member of it? So I'll give you a few minutes with that.
Sure. So Idaho Business for Education launched in 2005, so it's been around a very long time. And its initial and continuing main mission is to represent the Idaho business community, particularly to the state legislature, but in dealing with public policy and in funding and those kinds of things. And they have focused on what we all have come to know as the go-on rate. And the go-on rate is the percentage of students in Idaho who either enter the military or go on to some kind of post-secondary education after graduating from high school. And Idaho has a very low go-on rate. In fact, it's fallen during the pandemic, but we're in the 40% range. And the concern there isn't so much that everybody needs to go to college, but the concern is that that reality is creating a workforce skills gap. And so we have a lot of our members, and our members are everybody from Micron and Melaleuca, all of the big companies in the state to a lot of smaller companies, but we have several hundred members, very active, very passionate about assisting in addressing a number of educational issues. But the main concern they have is creating a workforce that they can pull from and that can support their business. And that comes from Idaho. So we don't have to be recruiting from every other state to fill these really great jobs that are open. Cybersecurity jobs, there are hundreds open in our state, but we don't have enough of the skill set to fill those. And so that's where IBE began. And so when the Workforce Development Council began looking at this U.S. Department of Labor grant that is funding the Youth Apprenticeship Program, it sort of made sense that it would be administered through this nonprofit that already existed and already has a mission that fits. And so it basically was bolted on to the Idaho Business for Education nonprofit organization. So there are now 7 of us who are fully funded by this U.S. Department of Labor grant, but it's administered by the Idaho Department of Labor, or the Idaho Business for Education. I work for that nonprofit group. But we collaborate closely with Wendy Seacrest and the Workforce Council Development and the U.S. Department of Labor and the Idaho Department of Labor, and so that's the link between Idaho Business for Education and the Youth Apprenticeship Program.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm going to ask a question that it just occurred to me while you were going through this, and I don't know the answer, but do you think IBE works with universities very much? I know that they're deeply involved with the 4 community colleges and then the College of Technology at LC and ISU. But do you think that there is a strong connection with the universities?
I do think there is a strong connection with the universities. I know that Rod Grammer, who is the president of IBE, has good relationships with all of the higher education institutions in the state, including BYU Idaho. But and so I know there is a lot of communication and a lot of conversation that goes on between the IBE folks, and of course now in our apprenticeship program there are, and I'll talk about this in more detail, but there are obvious connections between apprenticeship and the training that can and is provided by community colleges and universities and others. And so that connection is really only growing deeper as we get into the apprenticeship program.
And not to dwell on it much more than this, but I've got a feeling that IBE is interested in those baccalaureate and masters in technical fields like engineering. I think that's kind of where the sweet spot probably is for them, because you've really described what it is IBE is trying to drive.
That is so. But I would expand it just a little further, Rick, to say any area where there are workforce development skill gaps is the sweet spot for IBE. They tend to be in the highly technical areas, but not limited to those. For example, we know that in the next 3 years, we're going to have some major construction projects happening in Eastern Idaho. And there is a lack of skilled welders. There's a lack of these kinds of highly skilled tradespeople. And that's an interest that we have through apprenticeship. So we really try to identify anywhere where there is, as I say, an itch to scratch.
Right. We'll come to. Lori hates the term soft skills. We'll push that
I do
toward.
too.
Yeah. Well, there's a better term.
She's right. There are no soft skills when it comes to this sort of thing, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, of course. That's why I use it, because we know what we're talking about. But let's delve into youth apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is, pretty well understood in the fields that have apprentices. But go ahead and describe what you do, what success looks like for you, and how does this work? And I think it's really, is it primarily high school students that you're dealing with?
So I'm going to kind of take those in random order, Rick.
Absolutely.
But so yes, the traditionally apprenticeship is connected to the trades. And so when we think of apprenticeship, we think of pipe fitters and metal workers and electricians and that sort of thing. And that's absolutely true, that they are still very, those are still very much a part of apprenticeship. But what we are trying to do is look at anywhere where there is as we say, a gap between what employers are looking for and what the state needs to get things done economically, and the training that is being provided and that is being received by young people. And so, yes, we work very closely with the high school CTE programs, the career technical education programs. And so yesterday I had the great pleasure of meeting with the 2 EMT classes at Idaho Falls High School. And these young people, they're not kids. There's 18-year-old adults coming out of high school, right, with EMT certificates. And so, but one of the things that we can do, and that I would like to do, and if there's anybody out there interested in talking about it, call me, is work with public and private employers in the EMT area to create an advanced EMT apprenticeship, so that we can, so what does it look like? What does an apprenticeship look like? There are 3 pieces. There is an employer sponsor. Now that can be an electrical contractor. It can be a bank. It can be an association. So for example, the Idaho Healthcare Association has 7 apprenticeships that it sponsors. And so all of its members, which number more than 100, can bring apprentices into their operations through the apprenticeship program sponsored by their association. And so, that's one, an employer sponsor. You need to have providers who can provide related training, and this can be anywhere from those soft skills that including anything from, for example, I teach COM 101 at College of Eastern Idaho. Public speaking, which is basically what we focus on, is maybe called a soft skill, but it's a skill that you will use in any career or in any walk of life in your family, there is no downside. There is no wasted time in learning how to speak and how to communicate orally and how to do research and how to prepare for a speech. And so, am I passionate about this? So CEI is a significant player in providing related training for apprenticeship. It can be ISU, it can be an online program, it can be CTE programs at the high schools. And then the third piece, of course, is the young person. And so here's the thing: our focus is on young people from 16 to 24 years of age. We know that 40% of those students, of those young people, are going to go from high school to something else, whether it's military or post-secondary education of some sort. One of the things that I think we need to do is include in the go-on rate young people who become apprentices, because that is now that is part of going on. Mm-hmm. Not every young person is cut out for college. It's not the kind of thing that suits everybody. And so when we find young people who have skills, who have ambition, who want to make a good living, and maybe college isn't the direction they want to go, apprenticeship is an alternative to that, where they will get on the job skills, they will get connected to some related training, identified by the employer as important to that, whatever that apprenticeship is. And by the time they are done in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years with that apprenticeship, they should be making a livable wage. And they come out of that having earned money for those 4 years instead of gone into debt to get the degree. They also get a certificate that is similar to a diploma. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of really lovely diplomas here on my wall, and they look very nice. And I can walk into an employer in any state in the United States and say, this is what I have earned. A certificate that comes out of an apprenticeship program does the same thing. You can go from Idaho to Alabama and say, I have this certificate for an apprenticeship. I'm now a journey worker in this area. And it means the same thing, because it's a U.S. Department of Labor regulated process.
And that's the wonderful thing about that, is that it's recognized federally. And we talk about industry recognized certifications. This is dead center in that concept, whether it would be a cybersecurity test, for example, Security Plus that was passed, or this. Talk for a moment then, Roger, about Job Corps, because I know that you're involved with us and Fernando. So talk about that synergy there.
So it's actually written into our grant to work with various populations that may be underserved, and Job Corps has a very similar kind of mission, and they are serving a very similar age group. And so we have a really parallel mission with Fernando and the Job Corps folks. Mm-hmm. We had a really good meeting with the Job Corps folks over on the other side of the state earlier this week. And so what we see here, and what I believe in, and when we get to the three things at the end of this conversation, right, you're going to hear this again. But collaboration is just so essential. And so what we want to do is work with Fernando and his folks and identify areas where, if there's any overlap, let's eliminate those. If there are gaps, let's eliminate those. But let's collaborate to make what we are doing more productive and more powerful. And so, and as we all know, and then one of my greatest frustrations is that we just too often don't know how many silos there are out there, and people that are trying to do very similar things, and then it dawns on us, oh, somebody's already doing a piece of this. And so that's what I like about it. And Fernando went out of his way to introduce himself when he got right here. We're going to work together. We're going to work together with the workforce training folks at CEI, and identify areas I will tell you, your folks at the Workforce Training Center are amazing. Jennifer and Matt and those folks are just some of the best people ever, and we've already been collaborating on some stuff. So that's the thing, is there are, the veterans associations that
Right.
we work closely with them, because that's an identified population base that we want to assist and be engaged with.
So I am really looking forward to this next question. So here we go. You probably don't have an opinion on this, but why do we seem in Idaho to have a high graduation rate from high school, but a low go-on rate from high school or high school age on to some level of college or post-secondary? Let's call it that. What do you think's happened?
Yeah, so I think there is some good research on this, and I like to rely on data when I can, but it's sometimes more fun just to speculate. Um, but so let's start anecdotally. I think we know that
Sure,
culturally,
sure.
higher education is not, or secondary education is not something that is valued to the same degree in some households as in others.
Sure.
And this all starts, if we try to get to students when they're juniors in high school, it's too late. They
Right.
already have, they come out of a culture where, yes, get your high school diploma. Yes, my experience, having lived in Eastern Idaho for 23 years, is part of not the problem, but the reason for this happening is that for so long, and we're now in our third and fourth generation of this, you could get a high school degree and get a really nice job at the lab and make a decent living. And
Mhm.
so, but that really is, even that is changing to where there are two reasons that this is changing. One is just getting your foot in the door now requires more education and more skill. And when I say education, it could be formal education, it could be on the job training, but some kind of additional education. Secondly, the odds are you're going to change your career several times in your lifetime. And the more experiences you have, the more learning you have, the more soft skills you can master, the better off you're going to be. And so, for whatever reason, and I don't know that we have any really good data that tells us precisely why, but for whatever reason, culturally, among many in our state, and this is, it's not a pejorative situation, it just is what it is. This has not been valued at the same level that it is in other parts of the country, and so one of the ways to address it, and this is why I love this new work, is that one of the alternatives doesn't have to include that 2 or 4 year degree. It can include a piece of the training that is provided through these formal education providers. But let me just give you an example, and then I'll shut up and let you go to the next one. But so cybersecurity. We want to create a series of stackable approaches to cybersecurity training. So let's say you start with sort of IT-based apprenticeship, and you do a 2-year or 3-year apprenticeship that gets you through the basics. That could lead you to a point where you decide, I like this enough. I now know about this enough. I want to go ahead and finish this degree off. I want to go ahead and get into a higher level, a more formal level. There's a stackable process here. An apprenticeship doesn't have to be the beginning and end of something. It can be a piece of something. And so that's why I think it is such a potentially powerful alternative.
So, because we have a lot of our viewers here at the college, give us a couple of tips from someone who is working with these students, and you're certainly passionate on it, and I'm really glad you're in this youth apprenticeship program because I think you're well suited. Give us a couple of tips. What do you think the college should do to help increase the go-on rate here in Eastern Idaho?
First thing I want to say is that my experience, and I attend the faculty meetings in the journal ed department, and so I know somewhat the teachers and the administrators there, and I have to say that I hear this a lot in these conversations, and one of them is meet the students where they're at.
Mhm.
And so now you've heard two of the three things I'm going to give you at the end of end of this conversation. But meeting the students where they at is so important. I love that we really try hard to understand where a student is coming from, what their circumstances and perspectives are. And so I have had conversations with my own students in which I've said, I know you're struggling. I know this is hard. And so public speaking, there more people are afraid of dying than they are than of public speaking than they are of dying. In other words, some people would rather die than speak in
Yeah,
public. It's a scary thing for a lot of people.
sure.
I have never had that particular fear, but I don't like to fly, um, so who knows where this comes from. But um, I have had conversations with my own students saying, you ought to think about an apprenticeship. You're headed in a good direction here, but I know it's hard, and there are other ways to go about this. So I think I think there are a lot of all of the faculty that I associate with, I think, view it the same way.
Right.
They come at this trying to understand where the student is at, and we work with them. And so I think if of all the things, but at the same time, there needs to be a level of there needs to be a bar that is really not movable. That we need to help these students get over that bar, because that's what their employers and are going to demand. And so, meeting someone where they're at doesn't mean, letting them get away with a lower bar necessarily. It's how do we get there? What kinds of things do these students need to help them get there? So, and I'll say, this is not advice, because I hear it
Mhm.
from from the faculty. I hear it from the administrators.
So one of the things that we talk about is if we can get in and talk to sixth graders, seventh graders, those students before high school, and if they can envision in their mind an occupation, we pretty well are 75% through that concept of getting them into post-secondary. And I don't think you delve. Are you involved that early in any way in the work that you're doing?
No, we're not. But let me tell you a story that happened to me yesterday. So my
Yeah.
son used to teach seventh grade history at Taylorview High School, or junior high, middle school.
Right.
And so yesterday I was in two EMT classes of seniors that are graduating in May.
Right.
Out of 25 students, 7 of those had been through my son's class. And I'm a little emotional about this, because they all said in one way or another what that class, they still remember that class.
Right.
It was a history class. Had nothing to do with, it was a soft skill class. It was,
Mhm.
critical thinking is what he taught.
Sure.
But he had an impact on a lot of those students. And so I was able 5 years later to see they're coming out of here and they're on their way. And but that's where, our program specifically, our broadband, our bandwidth isn't big enough to get down into that level. And so we're hoping that by the time we reach them at 16, that we can reach out and make a difference.
I think that's really I think that's really the right attitude. And again, you and I both appreciate advanced degrees, and we've got to get these students over a hurdle of something like a youth apprenticeship or a certification, and they can tell themselves, "Look, I did that. Now maybe I can work on an associate, and if I can do an associate, maybe I can get a baccalaureate." That all can be done while they're employed.
Yes. And so my message would be, if the apprenticeship provides you the experience and confidence that then encourages you to go on more, great. If it doesn't, also great. If that's where it ends, and you have arrived at a place where you're earning a living and you've got the skills that are going to work for you, also great.
Mm-hmm.
If someone would pay me, I would go to school full time. I love going to school. We're not talking about freaky people like me and you who would just,
Right.
who like school. So, and so again, it's meeting them where they're at, and sometimes that shifts, right? And if that shifts, great.
And we're going to move on to what you have done, kind of in that area of conferences, because it is so fascinating. But here's the point you're making. Now, whether you go on to an associate or a baccalaureate or whatever you know and can do when you begin your occupation is going to get dated really quickly. So,
Yes.
how good are we at those critical skills and those soft skills to help anyone advance as technology advances?
If my public speaking students, my Com 101 students, come out of that class with nothing but a some new skills in critical thinking,
Mhm.
I win. They
You,
win. I'm happy. If they can learn a little bit about public speaking on the way, great. But really, it's about critical thinking and how to apply that in real life.
Roger, I was so worried that we would have 5 minutes and then there would be, 40 minutes of dead air. So,
There, yeah.
we're doing pretty good. So why don't you talk about um, when uh, when you were in your CEO position? And I know you've done a lot of conferences, setting up conferences, and these are high tech, complicated conferences. So talk about the areas they were in, and what did you do in that, and why are those conferences important?
So my approach to the conference business was, I got into it because journalism needed new ways of funding itself,
Right.
and so I began looking for alternative ways to find new revenue. But I looked at it as journalism in real time. And so I took the approach that we're going to bring in people and we're going to make news, and we're going to, we're not going to avoid questions. We're not going to stand up and yell at each other, but we're going to look for ways to find solutions without flinching. And so I did the Idaho Healthcare Summit is the one that is the one I'm most proud of. And I hope it comes back after the pandemic, and that someone picks that up again, because we were really making some interesting progress on dealing with a lot of important issues that are reaching crisis proportions in Idaho. Healthcare being one of them,
Mhm.
access to healthcare, the whole cost of healthcare, and so basically it was a matter of bringing together the appropriate stakeholders, listening to them, and from that, when I would write a story when I was a journalist, you cast a wide net and you listen to all of this stuff out there, and you stop and you say to yourself, what have I got? Building a conference is the same way. Wide net, talk to all of the parties. What have we got? And then you try to bring them together in such a way where you don't have chaos, and you create some kind of narrative that can result in action. That was
Right.
how I behaved as a journalist, and that's what I tried to do as a conference organizer. So we did cybersecurity, we did energy. So we did the Intermountain Energy Summit in collaboration with the Idaho National Lab. It was so much fun. And I will just mention this. We think that IBE is going to be putting together a conference in August on the issue of cybersecurity workforce development.
Good.
There are thousands, hundreds in Idaho and thousands of jobs across the country that are going wanting because we don't have the people with the appropriate skills in cybersecurity, and it's getting worse, not better. So we're looking at same idea, waiting for. I'll probably get my hand slapped because I'm a little bit early on promising anything, but we're in the process of seeing if that'll make sense. So.
I got a chance to attend a couple of the energy forums, conferences that you did, and they were extraordinary. You got some world-class speakers in that, and that just makes a big difference. These are people that know what they're talking about, as well as Congressman Simpson and elected officials. You did a great job of pulling a group together.
Well, at one healthcare conference, Rick, we had Kathleen Sebelius and Mike Levitt on the same stage.
Yeah.
Two former HHS secretaries still involved in the healthcare field, and it was just extraordinary. It was just great fun. So, yeah, we had the Secretary of Energy with the Obama administration here as a keynote speaker. It was great, and there is the role here is that if you can bring people together, something organic happens if you do it right that you can't create any other way. When networks are created, solutions are arrived at, and it happens if you do it right again. It happens organically through that process.
So I am really excited to see what is going to be occurring in that area, and obviously, energy is an important part for us. And you know a bit about future tech, and I think that's an area we haven't explored yet. But given our region, that is going to be a fascinating discussion, as well as cyber and health is always important.
Well, and there are so many things that are interconnected here. Energy, water, cybersecurity, they are all pieces of the same thing. And I'm working with some folks at the INL about in a group in which they're going to be doing some research over the summer involving cybersecurity and energy and water, and I have access to some contacts, and so I'm able to help build that out. So there's a lot of good stuff going on, all of which ultimately comes back to what apprenticeship is all about. See how I segued there?
Nice touch.
But it's all about learning and preparing and looking at the future and what do we need to be doing now to be prepared for it.
You and I have had multiple discussions about online learning, and from Gonzaga, you did your master's online, and you've seen some really good products and maybe some that aren't good. And of course, you're one of our faculty. So why don't you reflect for a couple of minutes on where do you think online is going? Let's put a future hat on, and where do you think it's going, and what part is it going to play?
So a part of the title of my thesis for my master's degree was essentially why online learning is not something lesser, and I believe but online learning can be a nightmare and a disaster done wrongly. Right. So can classroom teaching. It can be just terrible. And so there are methodologies, and there are right ways to go about it, and there are not right ways to go about it. And I'll tell you, the CEI technology people are amazing at helping us, the faculty, get online right, as particularly the technological part. But there are also things. I'm going to just make this one story because I see the clock and we're ticking down here. But so when the pandemic broke, this term social distance began to be thrown around, and it still irritates me because it's not what everyone was saying and still says is we need to maintain social distance. No, we don't. We need to maintain physical distance. Social distance is a whole other thing. And the secret to online learning, and this goes back to a Soviet researcher in the 19 teens and 20s called Lev Vygotsky, who talked about how you learn, and social distance and social connection is a key to learning. In online learning, reducing social distance without regard for the physical distance is one of the major factors in being able to convey learning. And so there are methods to do that, but you have to make it human. You have to insert, it can't feel like a correspondence course done online.
Right. Exactly.
That's too much how we used to do it and how too often we still do it. So anybody who wants to know more, I will send them my 70-page thesis, and you'll know no more than you did before you read it.
Well, and as we began, I mentioned that when I was at Portland Community College years ago, the concept of doing, let's just call it a speech class, we really call it communication, but they would say then it was impossible to do a speech class online, and you do that every day. So
Well,
reflect on that for a moment.
Two things. One is we're going to be doing this kind of thing after the pandemic.
Yep.
The whole idea of meeting remotely is not going to go away. It's going to get more sophisticated. We will get back into more face-to-face conversations for sure, and that'll be great. But this is not going to go away. And so if you can learn to communicate well in a live but remote environment, you can do this. You can do it face to face. It's actually in some ways more difficult for that student to look at that Brady Bunch screen and see all of those little boxes that's staring back at them than it would be to stand in front of a classroom. And we talk about that and how do you deal with that. And so we have the technology. There are methodologies available to us that can enhance the process of oral presentations online and communicating online. And yes, it is entirely appropriate now more than ever to teach an oral communication class online.
Yeah, because again, maybe a lot of our students who graduate may not ever get up in front of a group of people and present a project or give a speech, but I almost guarantee that they're going to do this and their audience is going to be remote. So what are the best practices to use this kind of technology to communicate?
So I'll give you a couple. I'll give you a couple really quick. For one thing, you look at the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm looking at my camera, which is above my screen, right? When I look at the camera, I am looking at you in the eye. When I'm looking down here, I'm looking at my screen. I am not looking you in the eye. It is really, really hard to do because my camera doesn't have your face in it. And so I have to train myself to look in that camera. And it's one of the key things that I work with the students about. Conversational tone. You have to put yourself in the place that you're having coffee with someone or you're having a conversation across the fence and you're not just reading a paper. You are conveying information in a human way. So it does take 16 weeks to take my class. And it'll cost you some money, but those are two kind of really basic ideas that if you can even master those two, you've come a long way.
That's exactly right. So, again, I was worried for no reason, Roger, that we would run out of topics. But what I like to do with my guests is give them just a little bit of time, and maybe you have 3 or 4 principles of leadership that you'd like to talk to our viewers about. So go ahead and list those.
Well, sadly, I've given away 2 of them, so it's not as it's not, some of the tension that we could have built here has been dissipated. But nonetheless, meeting people where they're at, I think, is really, really important. I think, instead of trying to drag people into where you are, as a leader, you have to meet people where they are, and it just really it is so key, and it's key to teaching. And really, I think leaders are teachers. We're all, if we're in a leadership position, even if it's one person, we're teaching. When in apprenticeship, we have a mentor working with the apprentice. That is a leader and apprentice connection. Make your mistakes faster. We are so afraid of making mistakes that we avoid trying anything that's even somewhat risky. And so, you know what? I used to tell my folks all the time, just do it. And if you make a mistake, honestly, you're never going to get in trouble for it, ever, from me or anybody else. It's when you don't do something out of fear of a mistake that we cause trouble. And so a version of that is from one of my favorite movies, Wag the Dog, which is a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. Sometimes I'm a bit of a ready, fire, aim kind of a guy, and
Right.
and
Yeah, you
we have
are.
a lot of people who are ready, aim, 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 and that doesn't get the job done. And collaboration, really, the collaboration is an art. Learning to collaborate with others, with other stakeholders, with other people, is a powerful, powerful tool.
So, Roger, those are wonderful things for us to think about. I think it matches very closely with the culture here at the college. We're so fortunate to have you here as an instructor. Who knows? Maybe people who have been viewing this would take the class from you, but probably most importantly, having you embedded in the community and talking about youth apprenticeship is a big deal, and we'll get a share of those students that move on for whatever reason to the college. So what a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, and I'd like to wish our viewers a great weekend, and we'll see you all on Monday. So Roger, thank you.
Thanks, Rick. My pleasure.